And so tonight we're really lucky to have Blixa, Bargeld, Chris and Cosey, and Carsten. I think without further ado, let's just start. A couple of announcements. First of all, there'll be an interval between the discussion, and then Carsten and Blixa will do a 20-minute performance. So there'll be about 10 minutes when they'll be setting up. There's a bar downstairs, or you can just stay in here if you want. So, in my thinking and preparation for this evening, there were a couple of terms that just kept on coming up. One of which was transposing, I've already said, this idea of remapping sets of ideas, sets of practices that come out, or ideas that come up, and remapping them onto a different form. So I think everyone on the stage has worked with dance, with theatre, poetry, performance. There's a whole wide range of activities, and I'm interested to hear from each of you about the ways in which these different things inform each other. So rather than thinking strictly in terms of Chris and Cosey or Blixa or Rastin and Carsten in terms of musicians or in terms of visual artists, what is it that the experiences that come out of one of these practices and the way in which it maybe changes what you do in another. The next is recuperation. I think that looking at the ways that each of you have worked from the start of when you were working as either in theatre or as visual artists, and then Throbbing Gristle, Neubauten. There's been a sense that you've been looking at popular or mass culture and taking almost sort of debased elements and forms from popular culture and taking and inverting, sort of dismantling and inverting them and using them as very potent ways of sort of critiquing, or this is disconcerting, messing up, critiquing or analysing sort of what the society and what culture is. So with recuperation, I think I'll just lay out what I think, and then I'll ask you to respond. And with Cosey, there's the stripping, your work in pornographic magazines, and then with TG, 20 jazz funk classics. Each of those seems to take a something that almost the cultural value has been stripped out, but you activate it and mobilize it in a way that goes against the expectations of what those things are.
Yeah, it's very easy to sort of get into the deep analysis of it like this, but basically, speaking for myself and TG in general, is that we just did things because we wanted to do it. We had no other agenda. There was no like, how can we strip this down and then represent it in a way that, in future years people look back and think, that's clever, or whatever else, or other reason. We did it because we were hungry for something that wasn't around for us at the time, that was missing somewhere. And as far as the stripping and everything goes, and the magazine work, that was the same reason for me, is that I went out there because I wanted the experience. And it also tied in with the work I was doing at the time, which was collaging sex magazines and things. So it was great for me to have my own image within those collages when I worked on them. And a genuine personal hunger for a different experience, and the sexual experience that mainly men got. And it was a very male-dominated industry, more so than it is now, far more so. And I was also interested in the sex industry and music, actually. So yeah, that was of great interest to me. So, and the other part of it was the control. We were all interested in the mechanisms of control, and the sex industry was rife with that. And I was interested in, instead of me doing art actions, which by that time I was beginning to get a little bit tired with, because it was becoming safe for me, because people expected something and I didn't want to recreate the formula. So I put myself in a position where I didn't have much control, just to see what would happen, how I would cope with it.
I think the majority of what we did, or TG did in that sense, was done for selfish reasons, really. It was. And all the analysis, the reams of analysis, has been retrospective, it's, after the event. But at the time, we were just doing it for ourselves, there wasn't really another agenda going on.
I mean, it was informed, the things we did were informed by things that we'd learnt off, over the years, reading and other musicians and so on, and philosophers and magic, all that kind of thing went on. But then we took it and did it our way, which is what I think is the best way to do. The people that we found really interesting were the ones that did it their own way.
And one of the things that I was very interested in is how, this time of the mid-70s, during the sort of heyday of conceptual art, you have someone like Dan Graham doing these quite dry pieces that propose circulating your artwork through magazines. You have someone like Mary Kelly, who's was part of this very sort of academic, theoretical feminist movement, and who also showed at the ICA in 1976. And I was very interested in the ways that you were using some of those same strategies or same concerns, but in such a completely different way.
They weren't concerns to me. That's the point. They weren't a big concern to me, and feminism as such, I found at the time, it was limiting what women could do, and I didn't have any time for that. So I wasn't even anti-feminist because I didn't even want to think about it. I was out doing my own thing. I never regarded myself as being gender specific either, because I worked with such a lot of men, and I was brought up almost like I should have been the son. So I was brought up with this kind of self-drive and self-right, like I've got a right to do anything I want. Never even thought that it had to be only a guy could do that or whatever. So no, I wasn't interested in those things. That's not what drove me at all. It was, like Chris said, purely self-interest.
And that sort of where you position yourself in relation to whether or not you have a political practice. Other people clearly decided that you did. The infamous Records of Civilization quote from Nicholas Fairbank. Acts of Parliament or discussion in Parliament that led to the Keen Transmission show being closed at the ICA. So in some ways that's sort of TG being recuperated by the political system, even if you felt like you weren't.
Well, yeah, every action is political. You can't say it isn't, can you? But I mean, we weren't driven by politics at all. We just saw the debris of everything that had gone on, and that's what we got hold of and recycled it into something that really told the story of what was going on, instead of giving something superficial to dance along to at night, at the weekends when you're getting drunk. We wanted something more positive than that.
And Blixa, with Neubatten, in some ways it's the same kinds of questions with...
I would very much give the same kind of answers.
Well, in that case, moving on.
I can really second all that I didn't really start with a political analysis before we started becoming musicians. It was very much what we wanted to do at the time, and it was something that we didn't have and that wasn't there. And it's also very simple. It's a bit of a way of life. You have to, in a way, if for me, in my upbringing and my social programming, the possibility to become an artist wasn't really there. I had, in a way, to annihilate myself first and invent a different version of myself to give myself that possibility at all. And from there on, I was able to open doors that were not really visible to me before. But altogether, that was not really, of course, I second also that, everything I read and all the philosophers and everything, everything I heard and all the musicians, that all filtered through there and that all distilled itself there, but it was not a matter of analysis and trying to become an artist in the sense of high artist, because that possibility didn't really figure in my world as an actual possibility.
Although the name Sims and Neubatten, there's such a particular reference to post-war Germany, to
not really. It's just it's very simple. You differ. If you talk about Neubauten, you differ between buildings being erected before the Second World War and buildings being erected after the Second World War. The first ones are called Altbauten and the other ones are called Neubauten. And if they are built badly, which is still happening everywhere around the world nowadays, then they sometimes collapse. And then they are Einstürzende Neubauten. Not much of an analysis in that either.
No, but a very strong critique.
Steel and concrete that we're talking about.
But there is a strong critique, I think. And that...
No, there's just a cheerful and jolly kind of...
Well, on the cheerful and jolly kind of attitude, maybe I can try a different tack, which is...
You have to remember, we all have a sense of humour.
Even German.
That's why I didn't factor in with.
He's German too.
So I'll now resort to. I won't quote you, but I'll resort to interviews where you've talked about. Trying to somehow recuperate German song, like from the up until the point where you started.
That is certainly a very very special case. As you can hear my accent, I'm a German native speaker, and because I'm a singer and or like the work with the voice and with words and lyrics always has been a part of what I'm doing. I was always strongly interested in the singing in German, and that has a particular history and a particular history that has to be reclaimed and has to be removed and reclaimed and changed. Yeah, there's something there that I probably have stated that every now and then. Yeah. Now I don't have to state it that much anymore. If I now look around in Germany, which I don't do much anymore, but then suddenly it seems to be 100% accepted to sing in German again.
But at the time when you started,
it wasn't
a radical kind of...
It wasn't radical, but it wasn't that normal.
I'm very worried.
It was still considered that a German, the weirdest idea in the world, the German is a language that you can't sing.
No, but surely that's the thing, is that it's...
Which defies the idea of a language, first of all, completely. Just...
But also in the...
You sing in...
But in the early part of the 20th century, German was the language of song in some ways.
No, really, I make a note of that. True, but it was still like at the time that like after Second World War, etc. There's of course a broken tradition in it, and rightfully so, partly. And especially in popular culture and in popular music, it was not considered accurate or possible to sing, let's say, rock and roll or any kind of popular music in Germany. It was just not, people were trying to make you believe it's not possible. It's probably not possible it's probably even possible to sing Schubert and Kunstlied as rock and roll, yeah. Probably even that is possible.
Carsten, in terms of having grown up in the East, in terms of like when you were starting out, did you what seemed possible in terms of approaching being a musician in the mid-80s, late 80s, before the wall came down, after the wall came down? Were there changes in terms of sort of channels that you could access, in terms of...
Yeah, I think I grew up in a really interesting situation because there been three generations of intellectuals in East Germany, and one of them before me almost left East Germany. Like this is like connected to one specific event. There was a singer-songwriter called Biermann, and he kind of caused that many intellectuals left East Germany.
And exodus.
A kind of exodus, yeah. So there was a kind of situation, basically imagine there's nobody there anymore, and there's only a young generation like us, like I was this next generation, let's say. And we are being not really afraid about the state anymore, because we know we cannot lose much here. You know, what can we lose? I mean, we can only try again. And I think one of the things was the generation before tried to work with the government doing things. We didn't try this even. Yeah, we just started working in small underground spaces and realized that there's much more freedom as people think. There was much less control as people are telling us, being there. So we kind of tested every day a little bit more. Okay, how much more we can do here? And yeah, that's if something went as well, we've been very playful. On the other hand, we've been very young. We didn't been really aware that we might face big trouble for us or for our family. But we've been not afraid at all. So
that's key difference in the situations in which you started out.
I definitely think it can't be stressed enough that there is certainly a different socialization and a different process of becoming an artist for Carsten than it was for us three, growing up in a completely different society there. Yeah.
I think there's an element of risk taken by all of us, but it's like far exceeded. It's magnified.
It's magnified by political situation.
But what you were saying, that even when freedom is limited, I still think somehow that's a great catalyst for great work, because people that really want to come through, they find the cracks, and it is possible. And that does annoy me nowadays when people say that, well, what can you do now? And I think, Jesus, you've got so much more available to you than we ever had. You know?
We didn't have much in a way, and there was no electronic music instrument to buy in a shop or something. But I think electronic people, this time I didn't do any music, but like Frank and Olaf, my label mates, they had a electronic band called Agi Geige in this time, and very unusual for them to do this. Actually, it's a kind of Alvin Lucier piece here.
What did you say? Can you cut the low end? From the beginning I was waiting to say that. Could you just cut the low end, please? Thank you.
Wow.
That's
Okay.
a totally different situation.
Wow. You can hear us.
Can you hear us now?
It's better?
Yeah, okay. Good. Okay, so moving on. Theatre, and particularly for you, Blixa, I think,
I have
been a very
said in
important
interviews I'm getting asked about theatre every now and then, and I don't really see it justified by the amount of work that I've done in the theatre, which is not very much to be connected with theatre that much. I am open to all other kinds of disciplines, and but it's literally, I've written a theatre play, I've directed 2, and I've acted in about 3. So that does not really justify me being connected with it that much. I do have the same basic and the same attitude to whatever discipline is that I'm working with. If I have to work with a theatre as a machinery, as a place and as a space, and I still try to use the same techniques and the same strategies that I would use if I make a record with Neubauten or if I make a different thing. It does not really differ that much. You learn particular tricks, but you learn particular strategies, and you learn to face particular problems, because I think every work of art is first of all a problem, and all you have to do is find particular solutions to that problem, and you learn particular strategies and particular ways to find solutions to that are satisfying to yourself and that are up to your standard. And so it doesn't really differ very much to me if I have to work for theater or if I make a record.
I mean, even if you haven't, had a sort of lifelong investment in, producing shows and acting in shows, has the like being somehow connected to people who do work full time in theatre, has that been an important lens onto
well, it would be kind of sad, and if I don't learn something with whoever I work with, if I would spend 20 years working with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and I would learn anything from them, then it would be pretty sad. Yeah. So, of course.
But that's a working.
I hope I grow still with whatever
But that's
I
a working relationship. Well, what I'm asking is whether, even if you haven't been working with people that you've been part of a circle with.
The same thing. Yeah. The same thing. Yes. Yes.
Right. I mean, Chris and Cosey, are there sort of forms parallel with what you do with music that you return to, that sort of somehow kind of a generative of ideas, that you respond to, or is it making sense of things afterwards?
In what way? I mean, I think everything we do, we make more sense of it after the event than we do while it's being created, because it goes off on all different tangents while it's being formed. So
the way we work, we never know which direction things are going to go in, do we? We don't compose and write down.
No. We're not musicians that can write a score and then write, or say let's do it this style, because the minute we say let's do something this style, something happens and we end up doing something totally the opposite, which is what we prefer to do. We like to just follow whatever seems to be emerging and making itself known to us, really.
Well, I personally like to make things complicated for myself.
How?
I don't know. I just always try to come up with. I think at some point I thought there is only one particular thing you have to do. You have to make up a law, or a rule, a set of rules, and then you follow that for a while. Then you break it. This is the only way to come to an artistical product. You make up rules, you follow them for a while, and then you break them. But you have to. The good point is where to break them, and when to break them. But you make up a set of rules, and you maneuver within that strategy to find solutions, because you can bounce better within those rules, and then you follow that, and then you break them.
That's just working practice, isn't it?
It's a bit of working practice.
Yeah.
Well, for
but
some
that's
people.
why I said I like to make it complicated for myself.
Right, okay. You like to call them rules, and I just
I like to call them rules.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
that's it. You have to just find out when to break them and where to break them.
And is this when you're working with other people, or
anytime?
It's even more
I
difficult.
can totally
with other
confirm
people.
this.
Yeah.
More difficult
Oh,
when.
yeah. Because I make the
they
rules.
don't- Yeah, exactly.
But what if they've got a different set of rules, though? That's the thing.
Yeah, what do you mean? They make rules for me?
This is maybe a point to bring Carsten in.
That's a
Listen
totally
to this,
different
Carsten.
thing.
I only can make an example. I mean, we're just recording an album, and like every morning we come into the studio. I think, okay, now we're gonna finish the song, and then Blixa makes a new rule. Right? I said, okay.
Yeah, well, like
Okay, I have this idea.
you
We're
were not
recording
there,
16 channels
but yesterday, when
Like-
you were not there because you were here, I worked on that piece called "Electricity is Fiction," and I had to think about that for a whole day, and I ended up making up a voice out of electricity. That's the way you don't understand anything, but it just sounds like electricity. But it
I wanna
followed my
hear it.
rule up to that point. Now you can criticize it. You haven't heard it yet.
And what you said, Blixa, sounds like a kind of very succinct definition of improvisation, which I think is something that you know you're all heavily invested in.
Would you agree with that, Carsten?
Yeah, I mean, you said this earlier. You make all these rules, and then after everybody lost his nerves on following the rule, we're gonna change it. Okay,
We
that's
could have a
exactly
rule.
that's exactly what a rule is for. We're
Look
gonna
at
change it now.
look at the record sleeves of your record label there. Isn't that like the best exemplification of like making sets of rules?
Yeah, of course.
Look at your fascination with the grid.
No,
Isn't that the fascination?
6,000 and counting, I think.
No, I always thought I'm obsessed with like rules, but I think
that's why we're actually able to work together quite well there. You make up grids, I call them rules.
I mean, thinking about the ways in which each of the four of you sort of work or have reputations, I think there's maybe I hope, a binary that you'll object to, which is that Blixa and Cosey, you're maybe exploring the way in which the bodily relationship of the voice and sort of improvising with that in one way, and maybe Chris and Carsten, you're sort of more inhabiting the machine and the programming. In what ways is that complementary? Is there a tension there?
Because I think what happens with us, and this might happen with you and Carsten, I don't know, because
It sounds like he's talking about Carsten here.
Yeah, your rule thing is applied to him, and then you come in and throw a spanner in the works because you're
I explore the body and the voice.
You're so involved. Like with Chris, he's so involved with the technical part of it, and then I'll come and I'll just say, well, why didn't you just do that? And
Yes,
so obvious.
before we came out here, we already had a discussion about cables.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did.
It's what you wouldn't be surprised to know that a lot of musicians that are performing have discussions about cables when they're backstage.
True.
How many time of our precious lifetime have we wasted discussing cables?
Yeah.
But Chris and Carsten, do you think that there's, do you have a relationship to the machine that is in some way sort of nuanced, unpredictable, something like a personality that when you're sort of in the depths of the studio, trying to pull out things that no one quite knows whether or not they exist until you do them.
Well, you do tend to personalise your gear. I don't know if Carsten does, but I do. You sort of have this rapport with certain bits of gear, and you have a better rapport with other bits of gear. And it's like, gardening. You sort of, talk to the plants and get them to do what you want. Please work today. Please, please don't crash. But I think a lot of electronic musicians work like that. And I don't know. It's basically it's all just ones and zeros, isn't it? But
well, I mean, to what extent, if you're in if you're in more of a programming relationship to the studio than a sort of bodily one, then to what extent is improvisation possible? Like, can the unpredictable happen?
It can, yeah. We were talking earlier about live performance, and I really enjoy live performance because of the random element that always creeps into live performance. Especially with equipment. I mean, our last tour we had things crashing on stage and cables coming unplugged, and you have to adapt to what you're doing to cover that, catastrophe. Well, it could be a catastrophe or not. And I really... yeah, go on.
Well, earlier, before we came upstairs, you were talking about a gig in Berlin in the early 80s at Blixa you were at, where you said someone walked
that's
up
the human
and
element,
poured a bottle of wine over your gear.
On my keyboard, yeah.
I guess that forces.
Yeah, that was a strange situation. The guy that did that was jealous of the audience enjoying the performance, and he wanted to stop the performance, and the only way he could think of stopping the performance was to pour a bottle of wine on my keyboard. And it did stop the performance, and there was fists flying and everything, and it made it quite an interesting performance. But there was no music playing at that point. Everything just stopped.
It also comes back to what you're saying and this idea of rules maybe relates to training and sort of either being like ending up in a career of doing what you do.
That's an interesting point though, because I'm not musically trained, nor is Cosey.
Well, exactly. So whether you go through a sort of institutional system that you come out at the other end with all of this knowledge about how to do something, or whether...
Mine's acquired knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, Cosey's had some piano lessons when she was a kid, but I've had no musical training or electronic training. Everything that I know is acquired from experience and what I've taught myself. So I'm sure that has an influence on how I produce music, whether it be with electronics, keyboards, whatever, you know.
And one of the things that I saw in an interview with you, Cosey, was you said this fantastic thing about if you don't have any training, then first of all you don't know what the rules are, so you have to make them up, or you just operate out with them. But the other thing is that you have no fallback position if it goes wrong.
No, you
so
can't fall back on a riff. If you're suddenly lost and you don't know what to do, which is what we found when we worked with Annie and the Eurythmics years ago, was trying to get the fallback riff out of Dave to stop him doing it.
I was going to some sort of 4-bar blues.
Because we were trying to do this like guitar break in it, and that's when we really noticed it. And they said to us that was one thing that constrained them, was their training. You know, is that you do have a fallback, whereas if you've not been trained how and what to do with an instrument and what is right or wrong, then you do anything to it. It just becomes a means of making sound. Like your voice as well, really.
And Carsten, in terms of your art practice, is that a familiar? Do you find that when you're, some of the things you're untrained musician, but maybe you have a profile as a touring musician with a label. Do you find that some of the relationship to improvising gets carried across into your visual practice?
I think I have to go a little bit back in history, but how we started. Actually, we started a little bit like as well, that everything is possible without knowing what you're doing, right? And I think this is a little bit like, I think you all be perfect examples, and you've been the kind of figures for me as a generation, like we had in German this genius dilettanz was this kind of, you just do what you want, right? If you want to make a film, you make a film. If you want to make an art, you make art. The next day you can do the performance, free jazz, whatever, action painting, do it. Yeah. And in a way, that's the situation where I was kind of socialized. Yeah? So I still keep a little bit this kind of ignorance of knowing too much about everything, and this is kind of great freedom you have. Sometimes you don't know what is done. I mean, you can just do it and think, wow, I invented something, and the next moment you think like, fuck, this and this and this people did it already, but you did it in a way, you did it on your own, and maybe you did it a little bit different, and maybe you're gonna change this in a way in the future where it's something different coming out of it. Yeah? Like the same with, that's a good question for you. Do you read the manuals of software?
I do. I read them from cover to cover. I always have done. I enjoy a manual like people enjoy a good book. I really do. Yeah. But once it's there, I never read a manual more than once. I just read it once like a book.
I mean, in these days, the manuals are 140 pages. I mean,
I know. I love all that. But once it's in there, some of it stays and some of it doesn't stay.
I hate reading them. I throw them away.
There's people like you that come to me and say, how do I do this? And I have a T-shirt that says, read the fucking manual. I'm always wearing it.
I don't read it.
Tech support.
Yeah, he's my tech support.
And so in some ways, even if you started out from a position of who cares, let's just do this, over time you acquire knowledge and you acquire sort of patterns of production or patterns of working.
Yeah, you form your
you
own
do.
skills, really.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is.
It's like muscle memory, there are
Yeah.
certain ways
Yeah.
of working in the studio that you sort of hone and refine and keep going back to, but it's your own. It's what you taught yourself from experience.
But then that's again different, because you say muscle memory, but that whole thing of when you learn your own skills and then you get to a point where you feel like you're repeating yourself. I don't know if it's like that with you. And I find that really an uncomfortable position to be in.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. Is
That's
once
where we
those
differ
patterns
from
start
trained
to emerge.
musicians who will repeat and repeat.
But
I'm
that's
quite
if
happy
you-
to do that.
Well,
good
if
to
you
collaborate.
don't notice
It's
that
not
you're
something-
suddenly following rules that you
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
made up yourself,
Yeah, yeah.
then it's getting dangerous.
Yeah.
But that's why it's good
Yeah.
to collaborate with people that you
Yeah.
wouldn't normally sort of work with, because they can take you in a different direction.
Yeah, but what we were saying, that when we do live music, we can never repeat the track in the same way ever again, because we can't repeat what we've done, May sound vaguely the same, but I couldn't say what notes I play on the guitar at any given time, or cornet even.
I mean,
Don't even know what key I sing in.
to me that sounds like a sort of, a radical social proposition.
I thought you were going to say social problem.
No. Or,
I need
these
help.
are it's precisely this sort of familiarity of patterns of working that, as soon as you start to become aware of them, that you'll do something to break those patterns, and whether
But
or
it's
not.
like Blixa said, it's a way of life. You're constantly just
It is-
experimenting
it
with
is
yourself
certainly a
and
way of
things
life.
around you, I don't know any different, I never have. And like Carsten was saying, and you, that we were formed, if you like, in a kind of environment where people were saying no to authority, and they were dropping out of university and everything. So there wasn't a degree, wasn't some sort of goal, In actual fact, it was something that you should not go after. You should just go and do your own thing and make something new.
And
Rather
that's
than
a very different situation to now.
it is totally
Like,
different.
In broader society, but also
But
in the
similar
arts.
in the fact that the goals were there and the pressure was for you to go to university and get a job as an accountant or whatever.
And one of the ways, the professionalisation of art school education, the ways in which knowing how to move, how to manoeuvre through the industry is
totally.
something that is that seems very different.
Yeah, it's not as nurtured as it was.
Right.
Art school, I don't think.
Blixa, I wanted to ask you about, coming back to this idea of song and kind of recuperating people like Dr. Lenya or Kurt Weill. I was listening to okay, let's leave Kurt Weill then. Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's such an amazing version, and there seems to be a parallel between the ways that you're taking this.
Well, for example, that was written for a theatre play.
Right.
So it wasn't even my idea. The director said he wants to have Somewhere Over the Rainbow at the end of it, and I had to find a solution how to integrate that into my personal cosmos that I was working on for that play. And that's how this version ends up to be such an eerie and strange version. It was a Bernard-Marie Coltes play, and somebody hangs himself in the end. And that's when Somewhere Over the Rainbow starts. So it's justified within the scene, actually.
What's fascinating is
And a rainbow unfolds over the stage.
what's fascinating is that Blixa Bargeld sings
Singing
Somewhere
this,
Over the Rainbow.
I don't know. Okay, that it is. There is within the whole thing. I think that one of the greatest things that you can do as a musician is singing. Okay, it's probably one of the greatest things you can do as a human being. And it is, of course, a very strange communication that you have with the dead and with the ideas of other people if you sing songs that other people have written in a different time. Because then you have to start communicating with the ideas that are contained within these things. And every now and then I've done that, and I've done that to my, and I always actually liked doing that. I could live with Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It was my choice, as I said, but it's fine. It was a communication, and it was a challenge to do that. And you tried to say Kurt Weill. Yeah, I've done a Kurt Weill song too, and I've done a Lee Hazelwood song, and I've done a couple of other things, and it's always been, the process of getting into a relationship with that idea and that world of ideas, and making them your own and giving them your own interpretation. For example, for me, it was always interesting to sing songs that were originally sang and written for women, because you get into a very defined and clear gender discussion automatically. So it is with Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And I'm happy to continue doing that, yeah. Does that answer the question that you've never finished?
And one of the things about the way that you sing it is the relationship to the sentimentality that song has. It's possibly, who knows, but let's call it the most well-known and most sentimental song of the 20th century.
Maybe.
Like that seems...
Well, as I said, somebody is hanging himself on stage and a rainbow unfolds, so... I try to incorporate it actually within the music that I had written for that play at that point, and I tried to make it grow out of that, so that made it necessary to make all these changes without betraying the original idea of that song.
Right, so some of the orchestration that's in the background.
No orchestra.
No.
But
that's
the way it was arranged, the way the music is played, yeah.
Right.
I had a really, if you really want to know something about cover versions, one thing that I really liked doing was I did a Kurt Weill song, the Bilbao song, once for a movie, and the director of the movie was able to get me a 78 shellac record for practicing musicians of the Bilbao song recorded in 1920-something without a voice on it. So I was able actually to sing the Bilbao song with the original band accompaniment of 1920, with the crackling of the shellac and everything. And that was really fascinating, because I think the whole way they understood the way Weill or the other Brecht composers used the Americanisms in the instrumentation and in the arrangement was so different to what people would do nowadays with the same kind of material. It's much more bizarre in its arrangement, and I really loved doing that.
That sounds amazing. And on the subject of Hollywood, I have to bring up The Mummy.
So you Googled. One day somebody sent me a fax and said he's a sound designer for The Mummy, and he's looking for an unusual voice for that. And then they did fly me to London, and it sent me to the studio where I was going through 14 reels of movie where The Mummy wasn't there yet because it's digital and had to be arranged later. So there was a white blurb there basically. And then I got things like the director on the phone saying, so out of this mud comes the soul and it forms itself in the end. And I went, so I did that for the whole afternoon. I was finished after that. Film was finished too. They flew me back to Berlin, that's it. That was my time in Hollywood.
I love the idea of Blixa Bargeld spanning thousands of years, reaping sonic terror upon.
It was fun, but it was challenging. It was interesting. I wouldn't mind somebody calling me for the next film doing sound.
The Mummy 8.
I liked it.
The Mummy Returns again.
Oh no, they didn't ask me for that. I'm pretty sure they recycled what I did for a couple more times. once you got it in your sampler, you know, you don't need the original source anymore.
I think that we're getting close to time, so I think maybe the last question is, working in Berlin or in London in the 70s, and just when you were starting out, was there something particular about that city space, about that social space?
Berlin.
Like, well, Berlin for Blixa, London for you, but if you visited each place, what was it about starting out in those particular cities at that time?
We wanted to move to Berlin in the 70s.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. It was our city of choice to move to be honest.
I understand that perfectly.
Yeah. Because there was a kind of tension there, but it was really tangible.
It was really possible to survive there, artistically and personally. As a.
There's a kind of magic about Berlin that you had to be there in the 70s to feel it.
I have to say, I was really, really shocked the first time I came to London.
Were you?
Yeah, which was
disappointed.
No, not necessarily disappointed because I didn't have any clear idea about what it is. I was really shocked when I came from West Berlin to Hamburg also. But when I went to London, I was really shocked. I was shocked about closing hours and last calls. We didn't have these things in Berlin, and how small the flats were where people lived in, and I was shocked about many different, about the quality of the food, of course. I was shocked about many things.
Well, I was shocked about the quality of the food in Berlin, actually. When we played SO36.
Oh.
Yeah. I think we waited 3 hours. And it wasn't fit to eat.
When was that place? Was that before the ICA?
Before the what?
Before the ICA Neubau?
Well, I certainly came to London before the ICA. I think the first time I slept on Chris Brown's living room floor. I came with a ferry from Hamburg, and everybody was vomiting in the ferry because it was really bad weather.
Yeah.
And so it means I had to go from West Berlin through the GDR, through Hamburg, and then from Hamburg on a ferry, and then from a ferry to whatever the ferry ends up here, and then on another train to go to London, and then I was shocked. I wanted to be back in West Berlin.
I can understand that.
Do you still want to be in West Berlin? I mean, how is Berlin now, and how is London?
Berlin has changed a lot. Of like West Berlin, the place that I was born in, simply doesn't exist anymore. And I divide my time up between Berlin, bigger Berlin now, and San Francisco and Beijing in the moment. But when I come to Berlin, it feels a bit like much more normal, like other cities. It's much more bigger and more modern, but it's also more normal.
Yeah, we were saying when we were walking down here, weren't we, that the only bit that we felt any affinity with was when we went underneath a railway arch. And it's all decrepit under there. It hasn't been done up or anything. But it felt like home to me. It really did.
London in the 70s.
Yeah, London in the 70s. It was great.
Yes,
It was literally falling down, but it was good.
And the drinking water was terrible.
What here?
Remember that?
No.
The water in like London in the late 70s, early 80s, it literally came out brown out of the tap, and it was like filling the room with this
We
stench.
just run it for a while, and then it comes clear.
Maybe I was somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
So we now have better drinking water, but
The drinking water has changed here.
everything has
Maybe
been
people don't
sanitized.
notice that as much as I do. I have noticed that it has changed.
Now, I think that we should open it up to the floor. There are microphones, so there is a microphone. So if there's any questions, then please wait until the mic has been passed to you because it's being recorded.
He's asleep.
Carsten, do you need to do that? So, are there any questions?
No.
Good.
If
We
not,
have
then-
covered it all.
Well, I was there. Siobhan.
Carsten's getting ready.
I'm not sure if the mic is on.
I can hear you. It's okay. Yeah,
We
yeah,
can hear
I
you.
think that's better.
Is it on? It's on.
Yeah.
Okay. It's about the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I got fascinated. Can you describe at all when the rules get let go? Because sometimes I will hold on to a rule until
Well, I
am
remember
truly distracted, but then I might get through to a place that I would
Yes,
never have got through
exactly.
before.
Exactly, because maybe the rules are, sometimes the rules are simply there to prevent you from finding the easiest solution,
Yes.
right? Because you do something and you know, oh, well, then I could do this, or I could do that, and you know that because you've done it before, and you know it works, etc., and then you make up a rule which actually prevents you from using that particular escape. Makes it harder to think about it, makes it harder to find a different solution to it, but then you get to somewhere where you haven't been before. That is part of the reason for it too, yeah.
So it's a form of rigor to get to a unknown place out of pattern.
In a way, I don't think that's the only reason for it, but I think that is one of the reasons for it, yes.
Okay. And do you always know when you can slip out of the rule?
No, and I'm sure I made mistakes.
Okay.
But I think in the same way that you're able to make up a law and a rule for yourself, you are able to break it also at a point when you know it's the right point to break it. And basically when you know you don't need it anymore because you got through to the point where you wanted to be.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think that I always think that like a piece of art, any kind of like a thing of value manifests itself and will make itself known. Once it's there, you know, aha, this is it, it's there.
And it can be really quick.
Yeah, that can be really quick. That can be just happen like this.
Yeah.
It can also be but then suddenly you know this is it.
Yeah.
And then that's where you can just let go, and then you don't need this rule to follow anymore because there it is.
You can't say why either,
No.
I don't think, but you just know it is.
No.
Do any
Could
of you
drift into an esoteric discussion there.
Yes, yeah, no,
Possibly.
let's not get that.
Probably not necessary.
All the time.
The hint is enough.
Yeah.
Are there any particular rules that you find yourself coming back
No,
to?
they of course no. That would be beside the point to come back to a rule. But at a particular problem, you would probably make up a particular strategy to prevent you from easy escapes from the already used up knowledge, from all kinds of things that are not leading you anywhere where you should be.
I guess the rule that you would come back to would be the rule of training. So
Yeah,
that's
that would be just training. Yeah. And then you would know the solution already.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any other questions? Yeah, if you can just hold for the mic a moment.
I'm a dancer, so maybe the question that I will ask, it's about repetition. Because I know that the way that musicians work, even we can use the same score for making music or dance, but about repetition, I maybe would guess that dancers do it more. And my question is, what's the role of taking repetition into your improvisation and composition ways of diving into it? What's the role of repetition to achieve a certain way of focusing and then to let it go after it?
I think repetition can be used to emphasize a feeling within what you're doing. If you come across something and you repeat it that works for you or you think it's working for the audience, then if you start repeating that and then work on that repetition and modify it and then repeat it, that's how it works for me, personally.
I don't think there's, in general, a mistake with repetition.
I don't think it's a bad thing.
No.
How do you mean repetition? In what way? In technique, or in literally what you play or dance, or?
It doesn't need to be seen as a technique, maybe as a tool also to insist on a certain rule, for example.
I think sometimes there is if there's a repetition that is like a platform platform from where you launch new ideas, then that, I can understand that, because sometimes I'm like that in the studio. I'll go in and start at a certain point knowing that I'm not going to use anything that I've used there, that I've done there, but I know it will take me somewhere else. But there has to be a starting point, and I suppose that is the repetition in my working practice, is that there's a starting point, or certain, like with my art actions, I used to have certain art objects that I took with me that acted as a starting point for me and could be seen as repetition because they are visually there.
Well, some of your movements that you used to do, you repeated those. Yeah.
And the movements in my art actions as well. But that's a means to an end. So in that respect, repetition does have a place in the way I work.
Do you use rules as a way of something to bounce back to as a way of creating a problem to respond to over and over again in different ways?
I think we're in a danger here of like oversimplifying the idea of what I said there. I said that I think that it is necessary to make up a rule and follow that rule and then break the rule at a point when and where you find it fitting to do so. It's not just the idea of making up rules. That would make it far too simple. So it is not for me to fall back to something that I know, and it is much more, as what I've said before, it's more a strategy of going beyond yourself and beyond the things that you were thinking and doing before.
Are there more questions? If I could just get the mic.
Given the fact that you've been artists for a long time, how do you feel that your passion towards your art what forms have they taken in terms of affecting your creations?
Do you mean what forms in terms of
in
theatre, dance, music?
Well, I guess like starting off, I guess, as a youth and then kind of progressing to where you are now, how do you feel the physical world maybe and age affects creation or your artistic processes?
You're saying as you accumulate experience and knowledge and everything else, how does that affect your passion for your work and everything? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, do you find that
because there's a big difference from when you're young, in your early 20s, to where we are now.
Because I find now, like I'm in my mid-20s, and when I was younger, in my teens, I'm still open to a lot more music, but I'm more or art and all that kind of stuff, but I'm more picky and I'm following my own path. Do you find, as the road gets narrower, do you find even though it doesn't get wider for you as well? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does. We're talking about this afternoon, actually, about this kind of like knee-jerk reaction to everything when you're younger, and you just go out there and you scatter everything out and then grab things back again, and you create things from that. And then as you go on, you realise you get a little bit more discerning about what you do. And as for me, I never really want to repeat myself anyway. I'm not looking for a formula that's successful or success in any way. But there is that kind of, what we were talking about earlier, is a kind of freedom and irresponsibility when you're young. And then you hit the road where you craft things a little bit more for different reasons and different kinds of craft techniques that you've acquired along the way. And your work at that point is finding its place in history or wherever else, or in other people's lives. So you have a kind of a sense of a lot less irresponsibility then you do sort of take your work up and you go along with it. But then as that work finds its place, I've found with myself is that I've suddenly come where I was started off at the beginning, where I'm free again and I have a sense of irresponsibility towards my work. Because everything else is back there. It's done whatever it's going to do, and I'm not really attached to it in the way I was then. I'm somebody else now. So the passion is different, if that's what you mean. It's very different, but you only know that when you've got about 20 or 30 years more on the clock.
So when you look back on you know, all the different kinds of projects that you've worked in, or contexts that you've worked in, does it make sense, or is it a series of fragmented things that are
some things
either
make
held together
sense,
by an idea
some don't,
or by a particular
the whole thing
detail?
is everything I do is a work in progress. So everything is linked from this to that, and it goes along. And then suddenly you can come 30 years along the line and look back at something from the 70s or whatever, and they make sense. It never, meant much to me then when I did it, because I was just firing off. But now I look back and I think that makes perfect sense,
I mean, Carsten, maybe, do you, as someone who has these ongoing parallel practices of the visual and music, that you sort of maintain quite a high profile in both, is there, are they integrated as a single idea? Do they come from the same place, or have they evolved into being different things?
No, there's all the same place, of course. This is one person thing.
That's not what you told me yesterday.
What did I say?
You said
Oh yeah.
Well, you said that they started at the same place, but
in terms of
as they evolve.
Yeah, in terms of course, then in the end, when you finish your work, of course, you want to place it in the right environment, like where it's best presented. So.
Okay, so maybe they come from the same place, but when you look back, they occupied different spaces. They form different narratives.
So I didn't have a question mark in the end, what you said.
Now, I can't quite see the clock, but I think that we're running out of time. So there'll be a 10-minute break, followed by a 20-minute performance by Carsten and Blixa. I think the bar is downstairs, but please be prompt in coming back. Thank you.